Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Fenced In. Fenced In is a Brazilian comedy that tells the story of Walter, a retail employee who suffers a nervous breakdown on account of the loud noises he has to deal with at his job, which could cost him his life if he continues to stay in it. He and his wife decide to move to the countryside for some peace and quiet, which works well until he's disturbed by his new neighbor Tony. Tony and his family couldn't be any more different from Walter and his family, as they cause a ruckus every single day, which hurts Walter's ears and tries his patience, and this leads him to try and figure out a way on how to cope with having so much noise next door. This premise gave me a pretty good idea of how annoying the comedy could be, and it ended up being so much more awful than I thought. It's easily the worst Brazilian movie to be released on Netflix to date, as the main concept behind its comedy quickly outstays its welcome and ends up generating heaps of cringe and groans instead of laughs. There's not a lot of depth behind the main character Walter besides his condition related to noise, which would make him somewhat sympathetic if he wasn't such an unlikable prick. It seemed like he yelled at least once in every scene he was in, which contradicts his desire for needing peace and quiet, and even when he didn't yell, he still came off as rude, whether it was toward Tony's family or his own. The whole noise gimmick behind him is exaggerated and inconsistent to the point of ridiculousness. There are times when his ears are bothered by people who aren't even in the same building as him, yet when he's in the middle of a party, he doesn't suffer any ill effects. There was no rhyme or reason behind when or how the noise would impact him, so the concept as a whole falls flat. His family members, specifically his wife Joanna and daughter Camila, try their best to offset his brashness, but it doesn't work. They ended up being pretty boring and not contributing much to the plot, though in fairness this is a lot better than dealing with Walter's insufferable rants. Tony and his family are just as annoying as Walter and his family, basically being the polar opposite of Walter by dressing colorfully, partying constantly, and not doing much else. I would appreciate the energy behind them, but as with Walter's behavior, their actions are way too excessive. Everything about them is over the top to an unrealistic degree. They engage in all-day music lessons, raise dozens of animals in their own backyard, and party every day like it's 1999. Tony's wife Kelly ended up being the greatest source of annoyance for me, as she has a laugh that sounds like Fran Drescher, and it just drove me up the wall every time I heard it. So as you've no doubt gathered by now, the comedy largely revolves around loud noise and the general lack of peace that Walter has. I can understand this idea as a concept, but it should not have been entertained as anything more beyond that, because not only is the noise grating to Walter, but it's even more so for the audience. The joke gets old within minutes after the movie starts, and it only gets worse from there. It leans so heavily in this idea and includes so many sources of noise like tubas, parakeets, and drums among many others that it could actually qualify as a type of torture device used for sleep deprivation. The worst thing about it though is the yelling. I mean, God, I've never heard so many people scream and lose their minds at each other in a movie before. All of this noise got so bad that I had to keep pausing for minutes at a time, because I got a throbbing headache just from listening to the characters. To me, once a movie crosses the threshold of making its audience physically ill, that's when it loses any sort of worth it has going for it. Now, obviously, movies are subjective in this regard, and comedy is no exception, but I can't for the life of me imagine anyone having an honest laugh at this trash. When the movie does take a break from the noise, it still completely fails at being funny. A part of this is due to how much it resorts to gross out and slapstick sequences, ranging from Walter getting plastered with kitty litter, firing a bazooka, and an absolutely absurd scene where Walter has to remove a parakeet clamped to his tongue, which I beg you not to look up because it's just that disgusting. Outside of all this foolishness, it's filled with cliches that have been seen 1,000 times in many other comedies before. The cops are best friends with Tony, Walter gives a speech to seniors who turn out to be deaf, and CPR is given to someone in the stupidest way possible. That last scene was actually a little funny, but only because the person is clearly visible awake at multiple points despite them having to be unconscious. The only thing I could confidently say was even a little bit funny was Tony's mother, who's the quietest character in the movie, barely speaking above whisper level volume. The jokes around the gimmick are still a bit lazy, but at the very least she gave my ears a break from the pandemonium, and it was hilarious to hear her insult Walter by calling him simple-minded. I also have to say that the movie does make pretty good use of its misleading idyllic setting. The movie uses its cinematography to lure the viewer into a false sense of security in the beginning, which was a nice touch, though I have to question why no other neighbor in the area seems to have a problem with Tony's racket. Despite the movie looking beautiful on the surface, the characters living in it remain ugly as ever. The fact that Walter is willing to harm animals just so he can get some peace and quiet is unsettling, to put it mildly, and as I said before, it gets really tiresome having characters yell at and be mean to each other. It just doesn't have any sort of light atmosphere that could warrant it being called a comedy, at least not one that's conveyed well. This becomes a huge problem in the final act when the story takes an unusually dark turn, resulting in a massive tonal shift that goes against everything that happened beforehand. The movie almost seemed to give up at that point, with the whole noise gimmick pretty much disappearing altogether. While I was grateful to finally have the chance to relax a bit, it doesn't change how off-putting this whole final act is, nor does it erase the rest of the bad humor present in it. Even the premise itself feels too dark to be comedic. Walter leaves his job because too much noise could cause him to die, yet it never feels like he's on the verge of death at any point in this movie, which further goes to show how lazy its overall execution is. For this kind of premise, 2 hours is a mind-numbing chore to sit through, and that's being extremely generous. It ends with the exact kind of basic message you'd expect to see in a movie about neighbors, in that one should be accepting of others for their differences, which doesn't even feel right because Walter never really comes to accept these differences, so in the end I could never bring myself to care about anything he went through. Overall, Fenced In is a terrible comedy that does a better job at causing earaches than it does at making its audience laugh. If you like comedies and you value the state of your hearing, please do yourself a favor and skip this one. Your ears will thank you. Its over-reliance on its central concept, unlikable characters, and bad comedy in general make it embarrassing and painful to experience. The only positive thing I can take away from this movie is that I don't have to worry about torturing my ears with it ever again. What did you think about this movie? Did you hate it as much as I did, or were you able to find some redeeming factors to it? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Fenced In. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Turkish drama, The Festival of Troubadours. Bye bye!